we saw Saquon Barkley ditch the New York Giants and say, you know what, I'm going to sign with your biggest rival and face you twice a year. Saquon landing a 3-year deal worth $37.75 million. A very good deal for a running back, especially when we saw last year running backs could not get anything in free agency. Sully, how do you feel about Saquon?
Well, I think that's, you just touched on it there, though, but I think that that's kind of the theme of the day here, at least one of the themes. We're going to talk about a lot of running backs already coming off the board after an offseason where it was one of the major storylines where these guys were just not getting paid. No teams really wanted to invest in them. And in an offseason, that's kind of turned on a dime. And starting with Saquon Barkley, probably my favorite signing of the day, just because it's spicy, it's interdivisions, it's rival going to rival. I just think that that's going to be such a fun side story as we go on a week-to-week basis in 2024. Like that first matchup at MetLife is going to be awesome, right? Like when he's coming in wearing a Philadelphia Eagles uniform, that is going to be just a fantastic storyline to follow for us. But from a football standpoint, I kind of have two feelings on it. One, from a on-field standpoint, I think this is a great signing for them. I think that they probably should get away from exposing Jalen Hurts too much in terms of running the football. I know that's a huge part of his game, but if you can limit that as much as possible, I think with a guy like Saquon Barkley, that's going to help this team over the long haul and keep Jalen Hurts fresh as they try to go back to the Super Bowl. And from an off-the-field standpoint, I would love to get your opinion on this too. They lose Jason Kelce, they lose Fletcher Cox, they lose a lot of leadership this offseason. I think Barkley's a great guy that could come in and be a great locker room presence and kind of be one of those leaders, especially in the offensive side of the ball, for this team that just had a huge drain in veteran leadership. Wouldn't he be the perfect guy to kind of take one of those roles?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you do need somebody like that in the locker room, and you have two gaping holes. But look, Saquon's been around. He knows the Eagles well because he's played them twice a season for since 2018. And the other thing I like, and look, we also saw the Eagles give an extension to Landon Dickerson today, their offensive lineman. So they're saying, hey, look, we didn't get to keep Jason Kelce and Fletcher Cox because they decided to retire, but we're going to take care of our guys, Landon Dickerson, and we're going to go out and try and make some big moves here. And that's what they did with Saquon. And the thing I feel like Saquon does over someone like DAndre Swift, and look, DAndre Swift rushed for over 1,000 yards last year. He played decently with them, but it felt like their rushing attack kind of slowed down once November hit. And because of that, their offense just completely started to fall apart. And the thing about Saquon is that he gives them kind of that home run ability. I think our research team gave us this excellent number that Saquon Barkley has 23 carries of 30 yards or more since he was drafted. And the Eagles, all of their running backs combined, have 20 runs of 30 yards or more since Saquon was drafted. So Saquon individually has come up with more of these big runs. And those are just such huge things. You get those on your offense, that helps get your offense rolling. And that's really what you want to see. So I really like this move for the Eagles. And as you said, it's spicy. Like everyone loves spice. This is just a fantastic move. And you know what? If Saquon Barkley runs for 60 yards a game next year in 15 of the games, and he's going to go off for 175 per game against the Giants, that's just what's going to happen. We all know it. All right, let's stay with the running backs. We saw probably the biggest surprise of the day, I would say, is Josh Jacobs to the Packers. What? Sully, it is almost 4:20 p.m. Eastern on Monday. We still don't know what the financials are of this deal. So what do you make of that? And were you surprised that Jacobs decided to sign with Green Bay?
There's a lot to unpack here with the Green Bay Packers because you not only, you see what I said, see what I did there? When you look at this, when I first saw this, wow, wait a minute. You're going to have Josh Jacobs with Aaron Jones. That's a pretty dynamic duo. Then the hours start going and reports come out that they're releasing Aaron Jones because they couldn't come to terms on a contract. He was due about $12 million this upcoming season. It was the final year of his deal. They bring in Josh Jacobs, or at least be able to agree to terms. They cut him loose. And A.J. Dillon is now also a free agent. So you are completely turning your backfield on its head. And I think it's a good signing. I think that you should have as capable of a running game behind Jordan Love as humanly possible. I know that he was so impressive down the stretch last season. And he's, technically, I forget what year technically he's going in. What is it, 4 or 5 at this point? But he's still a relatively fresh product, a new product, a second-year quarterback, if you will, a second-year full-time starter. You still need to have a sturdy running game behind him to take the pressure off of him. And I think Josh Jacobs does that. But when you start to say, oh, wow, that was extremely surprising that they bring him in, I don't know how surprising it actually is when you start to unpeel it a little bit. This is a Packers team that over the last calendar year was in on trying to acquire an elite running back. You go back to the summer, they were one of the teams that were trying to pry Jonathan Taylor away from the Indianapolis Colts when he was going through his contract dispute. And you thought at the time, really? You have Aaron Jones? You have A.J. Dillon? Why do you need Jonathan Taylor? But I think that they kind of saw this writing on the wall where maybe they didn't want to sign A.J. Dillon. They don't want to spend $12 million in 2024 on Aaron Jones, who is an aging player. They were going to get after some elite running back, and they ended up finding it in Josh Jacobs. So there were breadcrumbs leading up to this. So it's not too surprising, but still, it's kind of jarring to see how quickly things turn in that backfield.
Yeah, and I think one thing that you kind of hit on is that Aaron Jones is an aging running back. If you look at the big difference between these two guys, it's that, hey, look, Aaron Jones turns 30 in December, so at some point late in the 2024 season, and then you have Josh Jacobs, who is only 26, and he turned 26 on Super Bowl Sunday this year, February 11th. That's a huge difference when you're talking about running backs, when you're talking about tread on the tires and the wear and tear that these running backs have taken. And I think from a talent standpoint and where they are age-wise and how many hits they've taken, it feels like Jacobs is an upgrade. And I think the Packers think that because, as you said, they have been trying to upgrade at running back. Now, the advantage that Jones had, or even A.J. Dillon, is that they were familiar with Matt LaFleur's offense. But I think Matt LaFleur is kind of handpicking Josh Jacobs, telling him, hey, look, you are a perfect fit for this offense. You are going to crush it here. You are going to put up big numbers in my offense because we're going to run around you because, hey, man, you led the NFL in rushing 2 years ago. So, yeah, Josh Jacobs, interesting signing. I will be surprised if he is getting over $12 million a year. I feel like when the numbers aren't released, it's usually lower than the player would like. So I'll say, we saw Saquon get almost $12.4 million a year. I think the number was. I will say Josh Jacob comes in at least $1 million per year below that.
And I'll say this, Breach. Yeah, I think it is weird that we haven't seen the numbers, like you're saying. Typically, and actually, it's a good point to pause and say it with all these contracts. You're going to hear a lot of crazy numbers. More often than not, these are like the most gaudy numbers, the great numbers. But when you start to peel them back, sometimes they're actually not the real numbers. Like I remember we were doing this with Geno Smith and Daniel Jones a year ago, where it was like, oh, these are crazy contracts. But really, they're like 2-year deals for half that money or 3/4 of that money. So it's kind of let's let everything kind of simmer down before you start to really freak out about some of these numbers, except when you hear obviously fully guaranteed. But the one thing that I did want to mention about Josh Jacobs in this Packers backfield is that if you just look at the carries that he could be adopting, and obviously he won't take all of these from Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, but they are leaving 320 carries from 2023 going into 2024. That is what Dillon and Jones accumulated last season. If he even takes 250 of those, 260, 300 would obviously be crazy, but you're talking about a massive workload for Josh Jacobs, which when we start drafting in fantasy football and we start looking at potential rushing leaders for a season long future, the opportunity is going to be there for Josh Jacobs to have a ton of opportunity to pile up these carries and really rack up some yards.
I already got Josh lined up in my fantasy league.
Love it.
Don't give out hot tips right now, Solly. I don't want people in my league might be listening and they might write that down. They might try and steal Josh Jacobs from me. We don't want that. We don't want that. All right. We've got another running back. Man, it was running back central on Monday. It was just like they were so eager to get a deal after last year's free agency just went south for them. DAndre Swift, I would say this, maybe, you said Josh Jacobs kind of explained why it wasn't a surprise. Maybe this one was the surprise. Also in the NFC North, Swift going to the Bears, 3-year deal worth up to $24 million. What did you think of this signing, Swift ditching Philadelphia and heading to Chicago?
I think the surprising part about it was the aggressiveness on the part of the Chicago Bears. I mean, the reporting around their pursuit of Swift was that he was a top priority, and he was one of the first guys that we heard of to sign. One of the first reports once the clock struck 12 was Swift going to Chicago. And so, you know, I don't know if out of all the running back moves today, I think I like this one the least, if I'm being totally honest. I mean, he was playing in front of a unbelievably efficient Eagles offensive line, and kind of as we were mentioned with Saquon Barkley, that running game kind of faltered down the stretch. I just don't know if Swift is going to be that like bell cow back. I think that he needs to be more. He's best served to be in somewhat of a rotation, but they do, as we were talking about a little bit, with them set to draft Caleb Williams, they do need to have a stable running game. And if they feel that Swift is that guy, well, then great. It's going to help a rookie quarterback kind of ease his way into the NFL. Fine. I'm a little skeptical that Swift can be that player, but ultimately, if they seem to like the player because of how aggressive they were to at least come to terms with him.
Yeah, and look, the crazy thing about the Bears is I don't think people realize how run heavy their offense has been over the past few seasons. This is a team that finished second in the NFL in rushing yards last season and actually led the NFL in rushing yards in 2022. So it's literally been the Bears and the Ravens as the top two rushing teams in each of the past two seasons. Although the Ravens have an AFC championship to show for it, an MVP quarterback to show for it, the Bears have nothing to show for it. But I do think the point you just made is kind of the key there. The Bears said, all right, we've made up our mind to draft Caleb Williams. What can we do to take pressure off of him? What can we do? Can we get a bell cow running back who we can give the ball to a bunch? We saw DAndre Swift get more than 200 carries last season in Philadelphia. So look, if the Bears have proven one thing, it's that they know how to run the ball. And if Caleb Williams can play competent football where all the pressure is not on him in his rookie year, because you don't want to do that to a rookie, then this move makes some sense. But I think I'm like you. I'm not sure this was the best signing for the Bears. But you know what? Good for you, Chicago. I am not going to bash anything the Bears do because I feel sorry for him, Tyler.
I mean, hey, listen, they got the number 1 overall pick. They have a generational quarterback, or at least talent-wise, coming down the pipe. I think we can rib him here a little bit. I think if Caleb Williams is who we all project, the draft expert project he could be, they'll be fine. We could rib them a little bit on this DAndre Swift side.
Or the bad luck Bears curse just drills Caleb. What, they have 0 4,000-yard passers in the history of the organization? Man. Poor Caleb. All right, let's hit another running back. Tony Pollard to the Tennessee Titans. Pretty similar deal to what DAndre Swift got. 3 years, $24 million. So Tennessee decided, bye-bye Derrick Henry. Hello, Tony Pollard. What do you think of this move?
Right. I think it's good that we have these back-to-back. Like, which one would you rather? It's relative, from 1,000 feet, it's the same contract. 3 years, $24 million. I would much rather Tony Pollard at this price than I would DAndre Swift. And again, you're talking about a running back that did play in front of an elite offensive line in Pollard, so it's kind of the similar arguments. I just feel like Pollard's ceiling is a little bit higher than Swift's, and I know that it was a little bit of a disappointing year in 2023, as we were all set for him to take on this added workload minus Ezekiel Elliott and be that bell cow back. Didn't necessarily live up to those expectations, but still, I just think that this is a higher upside move for Tennessee than, say, Swift is for Chicago. Now, it is interesting because this also has another domino where what happens with Derrick Henry now that it feels like now that chapter is now closed in Tennessee. I'll be interested to see how Pollard does with the Titans. But for me, I'm way more interested in what this means for Derrick Henry, because as we'll talk about a little bit later, I feel like he is kind of a piece for a contender that could very much help them get over the hump.
Yeah, I think this pretty much signs off on the fact that Derrick Henry is gone, will not be returning to Tennessee, which we pretty much already assumed and knew going into free agency. I think this more speaks to what Brian Callahan is going to do with his offense in Tennessee. You have the thunder and lightning kind of combo in the back sometimes with the big bruiser and then kind of the guy who has the moves out of the backfield. Well, Brian Callahan wants lightning and lightning. He wants guys, he wants 2 running backs who can catch the ball in the backfield because Derrick Henry is not that type of guy. He had less than 30 receptions last year. Then you have someone like Tony Pollard who had 55 catches last year. You have someone who like Tajay Spears who had 52 catches last year. So I think what we're going to see is an opening up of the Titans offense, and we're going to see Spears and Pollard catch a lot of the passes out of the backfield. And so that kind of saves you in case you don't find the receivers you want. And again, we talked about taking pressure off of Caleb Williams. It takes a little bit of pressure off of Will Levis because he can dump them down on running back screens or just kind of swing it to the running back out of the backfield. So I think this is good for Levis. This is good for the Titans. I'm not sure that I would have paid Pollard $8 million a year after what he did last season, but like you said, he was coming off the broken leg. So maybe he will take a huge jump forward this year.